She was paid to mourn a living man until the mourning became real. Every December, Rachel Adeyemi was paid to mourn a man who was not dead. She cried over her husband's living body laid inside a coffin, right there in the center of their luxurious home at Koa Heights Estate. The first year, fear almost killed her. By the fourth year, fear had learned to negotiate. Before we get deep into the story, please do well to subscribe to this page so you don't miss out on more beautiful stories coming your way. It began the year Daniel Adeyemi brought a white coffin into their living room and spoke of it as casually as a business proposal. He told her it was a renewal. A symbolic death. A yearly agreement that kept wealth flowing and contracts alive. Rachel did not understand the rules. She only understood the alert that followed. 2 million naira. And so, she stayed. Each year, on the night of December 10th, Daniel would bathe carefully, dress in spotless white, and lie inside the coffin as though preparing for sleep. Rachel would sit on the cold floor dressed in black and cry like a woman whose world had ended. She screamed. She wailed. She performed grief until it felt real. And every year, exactly 24 hours later, Daniel would sit up, sneeze, smile, and step out looking renewed, younger than before. Rachel learned something dangerous during those years. That money can make the unnatural feel normal. That repeated evil loses its shock. That silence can be bought. This year, the ritual began the same way. At exactly 6 p.m., Daniel entered the coffin. Rachel began her mourning. The house was quiet, expensive, and empty, except for her crying echoing of polished walls. By 3 a.m., exhaustion took over. Her throat burned. Her eyes ached. She stepped away briefly to drink water. Just minutes. When she returned, the atmosphere had changed. The room felt heavy. The air smelled wrong. She approached the coffin. Daniel was still there, eyes closed, hands folded. But his skin had turned gray. Cold. Lifeless. Rachel touched his fingers. They were ice. She whispered his name. She checked his breath. There was none. Fear flooded her, but denial followed quickly behind it. She told herself this was part of it. That the ritual was deeper this year. That wealth always demanded more. So she stayed. She watched the clock. When 6 p.m. arrived the next evening, Rachel stood up and waited. No sneeze. No laughter. No rising from the coffin. At 7 p.m., the truth could no longer be avoided. Daniel was dead. His body was stiff. Cold. Unforgiving. Trembling, Rachel called the number Daniel had once given her, a number meant for emergencies only. When she admitted she had left the vigil, even briefly, the voice on the other end screamed. You broke the circle. Death came and found no mourner. So it took him completely. The line went dead. Seconds later, Daniel's phone chimed. 180 million naira. The payment arrived. The owner did not. Rachel sat alone in the mansion with a corpse dressed for burial in her living room and blood money glowing on a phone screen. And for the first time in 5 years, she understood the real cost. Rachel did not bury Daniel in the backyard. She did not run. When morning came, she called the authorities and told the truth, not the spiritual parts, but enough to condemn herself. The money was seized. The house was locked. Her comfort vanished. But Rachel slept for the first time in years without fear. Because wealth that demands silence will one day demand blood. Rituals that promise life often trade it quietly. And when money becomes your god, it will eventually ask you for a sacrifice, sometimes the one you love, and sometimes your own soul. Daniel's body remained in the coffin at the center of the living room, dressed in white, stiff and accusing. Every time Rachel blinked, she felt as though his chest would suddenly rise, or worse, his eyes would open. Before we get deep into the story, please do take a few minutes to subscribe to this page so you don't miss out on more beautiful stories coming up. But nothing happened. By dawn, her phone had vibrated 7 times. Unknown numbers. Missed calls. One voice note she did not have the courage to open. The money was still there. 180 million naira, sitting in her account like a silent witness. Rachel remembered something Daniel once said, laughing over a glass of wine. Once the money lands, it means the spirits have finished their work. That sentence now felt like a curse. At exactly 9:13 a.m., there was a knock on the gate. Not the normal knock. 3 slow taps. Rachel froze. Nobody knocked like that except the men Daniel met at night. She peeked through the window. 2 men stood outside. Both dressed in black. Neither looked surprised. They did not ask if Daniel was home. They asked for the money. The settlement has been completed, one of them said calmly. Now the balance is due. Rachel's throat went dry. What balance? She whispered. The second man smiled and pointed at the house. The widow. That was when Rachel understood the truth Daniel had never told her. The ritual was never just about him. It was about replacement. She slammed the door shut and locked herself inside. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Daniel's number. She screamed and dropped it. When she finally gathered the courage to look, there was no call, only a message draft saved but never sent. If anything goes wrong, don't touch the money. Her eyes filled with tears. Too late. The lights flickered. The air grew heavy again, the same way it had felt the night she left the vigil. From the living room, the coffin creaked. Once. Twice. Rachel backed away slowly. Then she heard it. A sneeze. Rachel did not run. Her legs refused to move as the coffin lid shifted slightly, wood scraping against wood. The sound was soft, but final. The sneeze echoed again. Once. Silence followed. Rachel's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear herself breathing. Slowly, the lid opened. Daniel sat up. But the man who rose from that coffin was not the husband she knew. His eyes opened first, dark, empty, reflecting no light. His skin was stretched too tight over his face, like it no longer belonged to him. He did not look at Rachel. He looked at the phone. At the money. The cycle was broken, Daniel said, his voice layered, as though something else spoke through him. So the cost increased. Rachel staggered backward. You died, she whispered. I checked. You were cold. Daniel tilted his head. I did die. He stood up. The floor beneath his feet creaked, not with weight, but with pressure, like the room itself was reacting to him. Rachel remembered the men at the gate. The way they had said widow. The ritual was never about sleeping in a coffin, Daniel continued. It was about training you to mourn without love. Rachel shook her head violently. No. I cried. I stayed. I only left for a few minutes. Daniel smiled. That was enough. The lights went out. When they came back on, the men in black were inside the living room, standing behind Daniel. You have been chosen, one of them said to Rachel calmly. The wealth must remain married. Rachel understood then. Daniel was not the sacrifice. She was. She turned and ran. She grabbed the shovel from the garden shed and bolted toward the gate, screaming for help. But the street was empty. Her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Daniel's number. It was her own. The video played automatically. It showed Rachel, dressed in white, lying inside the coffin. Alive. Crying. The timestamp read December 10th. Next year. Her account balance updated again. 360 million Nigerian nairas credited. Daniel's voice whispered from behind her. You can refuse the money, but you cannot refuse the role. Rachel screamed as the men grabbed her arms. The coffin lid closed. And somewhere in the house, a woman began to cry. Rachel did not scream when the coffin lid closed. She had learned something in that moment. Panic was what the ritual fed on. Inside the coffin, the air was thin and smelled of old wood and incense. Her hands trembled, but her mind became strangely clear. Daniel had said the wealth must remain married. That meant the ritual needed consent. Not love. Not belief. Consent. Rachel remembered the first year she cried, how afraid she had been. The second year, how numb. The third, how greedy. The fourth, how careless. The ritual had not claimed her body first. It had claimed her conscience. Her phone buzzed inside the coffin. One message. Say the words. Rachel closed her eyes. No, she whispered. The coffin shook violently. The voices returned, layered, angry, ancient. Say the words. Rachel thought of the money. The comfort. The silence she had sowed. Then she thought of the moment she left the vigil, not out of greed, but exhaustion. For the first time in years, she spoke from truth. I do not consent, she said clearly. The coffin went still. The men outside shouted in panic. This has never happened. The house groaned as if the walls were breathing. Rachel felt the weight lift, not physically, but spiritually. The coffin lid burst open. The lights exploded. When Rachel stumbled out, the living room was empty. No Daniel. No men. No coffin. Only dust. The money was gone. Every naira. Rachel collapsed to the floor and laughed, not from joy, but relief. At sunrise, she walked out of the house with nothing but her phone and the clothes on her body. She turned herself in. She told the authorities everything she could explain. There was no evidence of Daniel's body. The case faded. But Rachel never returned to wealth. Years later, she lived quietly in a small town, teaching children who had nothing and asking for nothing in return. And every December 10th, she lit a candle. Not to mourn the dead, but to remember the moment she chose freedom over comfort. Greed does not drag you into darkness. It invites you in with gifts. Rituals don't begin with blood. They begin with silence. And the most expensive thing you will ever buy is comfort at the cost of your soul. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to this page for more beautiful stories.